Bueno, mi nombre es Nicolás Cardelino, trabajo en
I'm Nicolás Cardelino. I'm part of the research and development team at GeneXus. I work with the web generators, and as part of the web generators, we do a lot of things, but I spend most of my time in generated applications, in the front end of generated applications. There is something different in my present lecture. I'm not going to mention GeneXus at all. I'm going to leave the world of GeneXus to share with you what's going on in the development of applications, to share with you the characteristics of applications today, the modern applications, what the characteristics are, their architecture, the problems developers face. A few days ago, when I started thinking about this presentation, when I was wondering where to start, I found a tweet. You probably read it in my timeline. It's from a person that works with software, not specifically in the front end, and she said that the ecosystem or this world could be exemplified by this painting of 1562, The Triumph of Death. It's like a battlefield. It's very well known. There's destruction, death, chaos, but it's not so far from reality. Today, in the JavaScript development or the front end and web application, there's a variety of options. There are so many possibilities and options to solve the same problem that the developers feel overwhelmed, and not just the variety of options, but the constant change. What was the solution last year, it's no longer the solution this year, and there are alternative solutions. One developer facing this situation is like someone who knows how to play the piano, but then is given this instrument. So much so that people with a lot of creativity calls it JavaScript fatigue. So why is this happening? Why do people have so many options and have this fatigue caused by constant change? I think it would be good to look for an answer. And to do so, we need to project ourselves and see what happened over time. If we go to the very beginning of the old internet, when we had documents, we had web pages that were connected through links, very basic. Then we had a language that allowed us to do things on the side of the customer, the JavaScript. We could have effects or variations. And then we started having more dynamic pages. Then there was a revolution with Web 2.0, Ajax, and a new way to develop applications. And this allowed us to move out of that prison created by the web basic applications. And we had to refresh the whole page. And then we had applications that connected to the server behind to bring information and update the page. That led to the fact that developing an application was more complex. And one of the complexities developers faced was the variety of browsers and the problems they faced, because in one browser things happened in one way, and in another browser it was different. So there were many frameworks that somehow brought you out of that problem. And the winner, if we could call it the winner, was jQuery. But that was not the end. After jQuery, we had the iPhone, the smart devices, our applications, our websites had to operate in any type of screen regardless of the device. And the response to that was responsive web design. And then our navigators had a very heavy processing power. And this allowed us to bring the logic, which was previously in the server, to the customer. So the development became more complex. And as a result, we had frameworks that were typically based on the MDC architecture to develop this type of applications in a simple way. Now, a developer that needs to develop in Angular and integrate a map control needs to work hard to integrate it. Another developer has to do the same in React, and then it's hard for him to implement. So to solve and reuse the response, we created the web components, like the GeneXus web components, and they solve a very similar problem. One part of a page in an application can be reused somewhere else. This is standard. This is a standard of W3C, and it's very good. And this need I mentioned made it very strong in recent years. Finally, another landmark, a trend that is becoming more mainstream, is that applications must be progressive web applications. The application adjusts to the size of the device. That's not enough. Now, the experience of the user should not be distinguished from that obtained from a native application, and I'll talk about this in more depth. There's no easy answer to these complex issues, but if we look for a reason why the web has these characteristics, these many options and this quick or accelerated change, an answer is that the web is an open platform. In the web, we don't have a single player, one single company that says, this is how you should develop your application, use this interface, use this language. There are many players in the field of the web, and they have different strengths, and they all try to influence the future of the web from their own point of view. They cannot say this is the way for the future. Examples. One probably of the more important catalysts we've seen in recent years is the Chrome navigator by Google. Chrome not only changed the experience of users surfing the net, but also brought about other innovations like the JavaScript engine, which facilitated the fact of having one web application server, and many, many other innovations. Another example, Facebook, a social network, a giant. They created a framework called React.js. Another, GitHub. This company gives you a repository, and it has a framework called Electron, which creates desk office applications which are multi-platform, and they have different technologies. So different players, different types of companies, all contributing different products to make the web move forward. So far, we've been talking about this new world, this ecosystem, going through so many changes, providing so many alternatives. Now, if we move into the applications, I would like to tell you what they are like today. So first of all, I'll talk about the architecture of the applications, what their characteristics are, what makes them modern, and what challenges face developers when creating such applications. The developers are working in the JavaScript world. In terms of architecture of applications, let us look into history. In the beginning, in the old internet, documents, as I mentioned in the timeline, we had a server and a customer. The server would say HMTL, the client or the navigator interpreted that. There was interaction with the server, and that was a refresh of the whole page. Then there was the possibility of having JavaScript at the level of customers. We had Ajax, and that server, apart from returning the HTML page interpreted by the browser, with the logic installed, could update the page, and the server offered services and allowed the browser to access them and update the page for the customer. And this allowed for less user upgrades. Recently, as the processing capacity of the server increased, in the customer we have a fatter customer, if you like, who has a framework which is MVC. Normally, I put an asterisk because MVC or variations of the MVC pattern. From the server, they receive an HTML, which is like a shell of the application, very small. And then they update and load the information from the server by consuming services. And consuming services is very strong. We consume services of businesses or data from the server or from other services, for example, authentication services that are elsewhere. Now, those applications, MV asterisk, MVC, in the customers have certain characteristics. And here I would like to compare this to automobiles. A modern car today needs to be comfortable, safe, use little oil, must be attractive, and many other characteristics. The web applications are the same. We have a long list of things, characteristics that I will share with you. First of all, the application has to be progressive or adapt to the device that is being used. If I access an application, maybe the application is not showing me the whole array of possibilities that it has, but I must be able to use it. One of the basic functionalities needs to be used. If I access with a modern browser, then I have a whole range of applications, effects, animation, transactions, and all these glass beads. It must be responsive. It must adapt to any screen size and provide a good experience to the user. I must be able to access the application even though I'm having a poor connection or without connection. It has to be reliable and be offline supportive. It must give the user an experience that is like that of the app. This type of application, I should not realize whether it's web or native. The information it shows must be updated, must be fresh. The user does not need to update consciously that information. The application on its own should be able to show fresh information and update itself automatically. And it needs to be safe. I'm repeating this. It should be under HTTPS, basically. And it should be safe enough so it's not a threat to the user or the customer. It must be identified as an application, both for the device as well as for the browse engine. It must be recognized as an application, and this is something you do through a manifest. It should invite us to take steps, justified steps, and this is done through push notifications, telling us that there are actions to be taken. It should be easy to operate, and this connects to the next point. I must be able to install the application. If I decide it's useful, I want to have it, in the initial page of my device.
And one last feature, which is as old as the web, page should be linkable. I can copy it in the URL, and then I should be able to pass it on to someone else. If an application fulfills all these features, it is called a progressive web applications. But as you see, it's an interesting list of features, and an application of this kind entails many challenges. And developers need to answer a lot of questions, as if they were to solve the looking for Wally problem again and again. There he is. To develop applications of this kind is a challenge. These applications are complicated, but the bigger the applications, the more complicated they are. That is why the developer should find support in some kind of framework that makes development easier. And that is why developers use these kind of frameworks. For example, React, Angular, Vue, React usually accompanied by Redux. Now, in order to develop applications, they are JavaScript in general, but we have to decide which version or flavor of JavaScript we are going to use. If we want productivity, we have to use either the last version or some flavor that allows me to work properly with the syntax of JavaScript. But it may happen that we lose the fact that we lose the progressivity. So what developers do is to program with the latest version of JavaScript and use a transpiling so that the code becomes JavaScript, which is supported by older browsers. And with TypeScript, it's the same thing. There is a transpiling that transport the improved JavaScript that may be used with any browser. JavaScript is an interpreted language. There's no compiler that gives me that level of security that we have with other languages. So in order to avoid problems, the programmers have to choose a lint between several versions. The linting avoids bugs and ensures consistency in the code. The bigger the development is, the most important the linting is. And another decision the developer has to take is what to do with regard to the aesthetics of the application. Basically, it's a SASS. And applications are becoming more and more complex. This is nothing new, and the user interface is becoming more and more elaborate. Therefore, in order to be productive, they have to be supported by some kind of tool that facilitates the work. And we have different options that solve the problems better or not so well, depending on the tools we use. For example, we have SASS. Nowadays, the programming is done with this kind of tools, or they can use CSS modules, which solve the problems of moduling and scoping that was faced by developers in the past. And this is a good thing, but it entails some difficulties. The JavaScript ecosystem has an enormous amount of packages that solve any kind of problems. For example, how to handle networks and how to implement an application or a package I install in order to include queries in the application. There's an enormous amount of packages that depend on other packages that in turn depend on other packages, and they function with different versions, and this can become hell very quickly. So for this, we need a package management. The winner at the moment is NPM, but things change very quickly, as we know. These packages can be used for the application, or a linter, for example, can be a package to help me with setting up the application or to run the application. In order to include the packages that are actually necessary, it is necessary to have a bundler to carry out the bundling. The most popular ones are Webpack and browsing. And finally, the testing. I have to support my work on some tools that allow for the testing. The tests have to be automated, especially if the applications are very large. And here you see 4 of the most popular ones, but there are more. So to summarize what I just said, we have left the GeneXus world a moment ago, but I know that you are all GeneXus programmers, and still I wanted to show you what's going on outside of the GeneXus world and the architecture of the applications that are being made nowadays, their characteristics, and the challenges that are faced by developers in order to implement them. And I know I said I was not going to speak about GeneXus, but I lied. I cannot help speaking about GeneXus. Going back to the timeline, there have been several milestones in the world of the development of applications. And I wanted to show you that GeneXus has given responses to technological changes, and this won't be the exception. Like on other occasions, we are going to face these challenges, and that is why I invite you to stay here and listen to Alejandro Silva's presentation, who is going to speak about a new generator and other new features that we are putting into practice. Thank you very much.